Are we recording?
Yes, it says it is.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Janet Hansen, the Chair of the Historic Site Preservation Board, and it is 5:30, and I'm calling the March 3rd meeting of the board to order. Oh, I don't have a gavel. Okay, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Hansen,
Present.
Vice Chair Bachman notified us of his absence. Member Herr,
Here.
Member Maruzzi,
Here.
Member Ponessa,
Here.
Member Mashka Hitchcock.
Here.
And Member McCready has also indicated that he will be absent today. We do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. May we have the staff report on the posting of the agenda?
Yes, the agenda for this meeting was posted for public review in the required locations in accordance with the city's policies.
Okay, does the board have any revisions to the agenda, including requests to move items on the consent calendar for further discussion? No? All right, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
No motion.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Maruzzi and a second by Board Member Mashka Hitchcock. Any discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. All right, we're moving on to public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the board values your comments, pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. There'll be 3 minutes assigned to each speaker, and testimony for public hearing items will be taken at the time of that hearing. So today we do have 2 non-public hearing items on the agenda, and now would be the time to provide comments on those non-hearing items. And I do have slips for 2 speakers in the audience. I'm not sure you're both for item 4A. Do one of you prefer to go first?
You want to go first? I can go first if you like. Yeah, go first.
Margarita Jarabek.
Do you want to come up there?
Yes, please sit at the front. Okay, where's my agenda? Good evening.
It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to meet you. I knew Janet and Peter. Pleasure to meet you. So I'm going to just speak really quickly on 877 West Panorama about the research that I did and the findings.
Do we need Margarita to speak up a little? Are you all good?
Yeah, if you could speak up just a little, our mics are.
I have a soft voice, I'm sorry. So my name is Margarita Jarabek, and I'm an architectural historian with Environmental Science Associates, which is an environmental science and planning firm. And I was the director of historic resources for many years, and now I'm the historic resources strategic development director. And my qualifications meet and exceed the Secretary of Interior standards. I have a master's in architectural history, certificate of historic preservation, and a doctorate in modern architecture, urbanism, and critical theory. I've been doing the consulting work, historic preservation consulting work for over 36 years. I was hired to respond to your staff report to provide additional information about the property, to find comparative information on the subject property and the other similar properties in the area, to look into the architectural attribution of the property. It is a Clark and Frey, but more specifically, it was designed by John Porter Clark. And then research on the design of the home to understand its original design and alterations, and to assess its integrity. And so my findings were presented in the memo that I prepared, and also I did a summary of my investigation in a PowerPoint that I printed and submitted. So hopefully you've all had time to take a look at that. The only thing that's really different between the memo and the PowerPoint is that after I submitted the memo, I received the results of a request that I had made about a week before to the county assessor to get the handwritten assessor record for the property, which came in the day after I submitted the memo. So the results of that are in the PowerPoint, and it shows that it was from 1973, and it shows that the assessor had found that the property had been substantially altered and had also been painted by 1973. So that was interesting. And the assessor put the date of the property that they assessed the property at 1950 rather than 1940, its original date, because of the fire and the changes. So that's what the assessor did. I provided you with photos of the original house that I found at the Palm Springs Historical Society, so you could have that to compare. Originally, it was unpainted, and after the fire destroyed the east wing, the bedroom wing, the central living area, and the roof and the windows and the eaves and all of that. So all that was left was the stonework. And so after it was reconstructed, the windows that you see in the later photos are replacement windows, so they're not original. The other thing that I included in the PowerPoint that is not in the memo is more about the original owner, Mrs. Lewis W. Hill, because I saw in a newspaper article that she was a relative of the famous James Hill, I think was his name, who was the founder of the Great Northern Railway and was quite significant in our national history. Her husband was his son, and he was president of the Great Northern Railway after his father. They lived in St. Paul, and their significant activities are associated with St. Paul, it's not Palm Springs, and she lived here after she was separated from him. So that's really the only additional new information that I had to present in the PowerPoint as compared to the memo, which you had more time to review. So I'm here to answer any questions.
We're not going to answer any questions as part of
Okay.
the public comment. We'll-
Right.
If we have any relevant questions, we would do that during that item on the hearing.
Okay, and so, my findings are that it doesn't have sufficient integrity to convey significance and association with the architect or as an example of its Depression-era ranch architecture.
Thank you. And now we have Sherry Bonstell.
Yes.
Please state
good
your name
evening.
for the record.
My name is Sherry Bonstell. I am a land use attorney at Greenberg Glusker, and I have been practicing land use for more than 25 years. And before that, I was an architect in New York City, and I did a lot of adaptive reuse and a lot of historic preservation, which is a passion of mine. I submitted a letter on March 2nd that basically summarized the findings that were in Margarita's memo, and the findings of an additional letter that we also submitted from architecture professor, both of whom determined that, although the house and the garage were originally a work of Clark and Frey, that because of the fire and the loss of the integrity of the buildings, and because, according to the architecture professor, he did not believe that this was one of the best works of Clark and Frey. Even though they do have excellent work that was non-modernist, that there are other works that have been identified as and registered as Class 1 buildings that were preserved, and he didn't feel that this particular building met the criteria of the Palm Springs Municipal Code. So in the letter, I just summarized really specifically all of the changes that happened to the two buildings, but specifically for the garage, which is what we're focused on because that's what would be demolished. There was an addition made to that garage. The eaves of the garage were then changed, and there was a new roof line for the garage. The entrance to the garage was altered. It's now bigger, and there's a new garage door So because of all of those changes, we don't believe that there's significant integrity to require retaining it. And just as a matter of process, we're in the phase where you determine whether or not you want to call it up and consider it. So the two options are take no action, which is what we're hoping that you will do, or, determine that you believe it might have, it might be potentially eligible for Class 1 or Class 2. And if you determine the second one, then we can have an additional 120 days for the city to do their own evaluation and make that determination. But if you decide not to do that, then you can make that decision today. So I will also be available for questions during the hearing if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Do we have any additional comments on any non-public hearing items?
None of our online attendees raised their hand.
Okay, so we will now close the public comment period and proceed to the next item, which is our consent calendar. We have just one item on the consent calendar, which is the minutes from the February 3rd meeting. Do any board members have any comments on the minutes?
I have to recuse myself since I wasn't there.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the February minutes?
I move.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Hare and a second by Board Member Payanessa. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And one abstention. So motion passes 4-0, one abstention. All right, moving on to public hearings. The first item is an applicant-initiated application for historic site designation of the First Church of Christ Scientist located at 605 South Riverside Avenue, assessor parcel number 508-191-030, case number HSPV 170. And before we have the staff report, we are going to ask Board Member Marusi to recuse himself as he prepared the nomination.
And they must depart the premises, so.
Yes, he must.
I'll see you all later.
He's coming back. As soon as we're done, he's coming back. All right. Do we shut the door? I can do it for you. Just to make it official. Can't hear us.
Watch later.
All right, maybe have the staff report, please.
All right, I'm excited to start off the meeting with a Class 1 designation request that's before the board today for First Church of Christ Scientist Building located at 605 South Riverside Drive. So the site is a curve-shaped lot on South Riverside Drive. This is currently adjacent to some small hotels and multifamily residential development. And as you have all witnessed during the site visit, the building sits on the northern corner of the parcel with vehicular parking looping around the east and south side of the site. This image of the building is in its current site context, which reveals the grade to the elevated main entrance, the setting surrounding the site, and the mountains in the distance. The mass and scale of the structure consists of a rectangular or rectilinear floor plan with flat roofs on the additions and the shed roof over the main lobby and auditorium. The existing exterior building materials are both utilitarian and durable, yet the design organizes the spaces and the materials to demonstrate clean lines and functional spaces within. The historic photograph on the bottom shows off the elegant lines, the site design around the primary facade, and the fenestration is inserted in areas providing the breakup of materials and allowing for light to enter into the spaces. The 1956 photo also shows the building prior to the 1961 addition of the boardroom to the east, which we see in the photo above. The additions were added in areas that continued the spatial configuration to be compatible with the existing structure as well as the site. And the materials were integrated with continuity to the original design. As identified in the Historic Resources Report and the National Register nomination, the design for the church is attributed to the architectural firm Clark, Frey and Chambers. It was further clarified that Frey and Chambers worked in collaboration on the design, and John Porter Clark was not directly involved. As an excellent example of mid-century modern design, the First Church of Christ Scientist Building embodied the modernist ideals of using utilitarian building materials to respond to the natural environment. Unadored surfaces accentuated the simplicity found in the natural materials, and the layout of the plan was forward-thinking when it came to future expansions and additions. The site also on the National Register of Historic Places, it meets the criterion 3 and 5 for the local historic preservation ordinance. As was indicated in the report, the original owners occupied and used this space for nearly 70 years. The integrity of design, material, setting, and workmanship are all intact. Minor alterations include the installation of new HVAC systems, exterior lighting on the east elevation. While they do have some impacts, they do not compromise the integrity of the site or the design. And where they, in fact, the level of design and integrity on the property remains quite high, and the importance of the resource to Palm Springs during the post-war period is significant. The character-defining features are further identified on the next two slides. Given the period of significance of the site is from 1956 through 1968, the respectful additions were identified as integral to the overall design of the site and structure. Oftentimes, this is not always the case, but early plans show that the advanced planning for future expansion was incorporated. Additionally, the use of utilitarian building materials again creates that uniformity we see. There's the stack bond pattern of the walls, and that same material is also used for screening on the east side for the terrarium. The aluminum framed fenestration on the building is simple and located in strategic locations for functional use. The electric conduit, the rooftop mounted equipment, and screening material that's associated with the rooftop equipment are all non-contributing elements that were added later. Again, these features do not have an impact that disqualifies the designation of this site. And as you see here, they have been identified as non-contributing elements. So based on the analysis provided in the Historic Resources Report and the site observations, the former First Church of Christ Scientist Building is an important resource that meets criterion 3 and 5. While it's not required for all aspects of integrity to be met, the site meets most of the integrity findings, making it an excellent example of Class 1 landmark status. Following the discussions with the new owners on next phases for adaptive reuse of the site, the owner initiated the designation application so that future requests for alterations would be evaluated under the preservation ordinance. With that, staff does recommend HSPB adopt the draft resolution recommending Class 1 designation to City Council. Happy to take any questions related to the staff report. We do have the applicant representative and team here to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay. Does any board member have questions or clarifications from staff? Board Member Payanissa?
So Sarah, a question. Because the alterations were planned when the building was first built, is that, let me ask this a different way. Since there were alterations, but those alterations were planned when it was first designed, is that what qualifies it for a Class 1 and not a 2?
No, in terms of identifying the alterations as part of the period of significance, we were looking at the fact that they were planned as potential alterations, as it being integral to the original design, but that's not what's constituting a Class 1 or Class 2 separation. That's usually, Class 1 and Class 2 is usually delineated by the amount of integrity that is remaining on the site, and in this case, we find that the level of integrity is quite high, qualifying it for a Class 1 status.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, page 5 of the staff report, the period of significance is from 45 to 69. So it would encompass those alterations and they would be part of the history of the building. Any other questions for staff? All right. Is the applicant team here today, and would you like to provide any comments regarding the application? I don't have any speaker slips on this item, so. If someone wants to, this is your opportunity. If you haven't, no, you're good? Okay, I'm just.
We support it.
Okay, scanning the crowd.
Leaving it to fate.
Okay, so seeing no further questions of staff, I'll now open the public hearing, which I just asked if anyone has any comments or wishes to speak. Last chance. Okay, then I will, oh, is there anyone online who wants to speak on this item?
Nobody's raised their hand.
All right, seeing no further speakers, I will close the public hearing, and now the action is with the board. Any comments or further discussion? Ready for a motion?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Before you do, I would just say that it was fun might seem a strong word, but it was fun to see this building and the way it's being adapted. It's an interesting building. The details that are still integral in the design, I appreciated. So I guess I just want to make a comment that it was really an interesting site visit.
Yeah, I think it's a great adaptive reuse project. Churches certainly lend themselves well to adaptive reuse for theater use. So,
Agree.
Before I make a motion, I just would like to say that the idea of the adaptive reuse for this particular space by this particular production company is, I think, serendipitous. And that this building couldn't find a better steward. So with that, I would make a motion that a resolution of the Historic Site Preservation Board of the City of Palm Springs, California recommends that the City Council designate the First Church of Christ Scientist located at 605 South Riverside Drive as a Class 1 historic resource. HPSB number 170, APM number 508-191-030.
there you go.
Okay.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion by Board Member Hare and a second by Board Member Payanesa. And is there any further discussion? I will call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes 4-0. And do we make a comment that we have a board member who is recused?
Yes.
Okay, with one board member recused. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. Should I go? I can go get him. Thank you. Thank you all for
Thank you so
coming.
much.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I'm feeling like I'm sitting too high.
Adjustment process.
There it is.
We'll wait for Board Member Marisi to resituate. back.
Apparently it went well.
We'll give you a second to take
Some
your seat.
questions about the historic resource report.
Well, especially the person who prepared it.
Yeah.
All right, we're moving on to unfinished business, which we have none, so now we will move on to new business. The first item under new business is the owner submitted application for request for a major alteration to a Class 3 site at 877 Panorama Avenue, case number HDMO 2025-0013. Staff report, please.
So the first item listed under new business is the request for a major alteration to the Class 3 site at 877 Panorama, up in the hills of Little Tuscany. This item was previously seen by the board in the February meeting, but since the board was unable to reach a decision at that time, it is being brought back for review. Since the February meeting, the applicant has submitted public comments, which was included in your packet material, as well as the additional public comments provided yesterday and today. So all of that has been distributed and made available online and is part of the record. We do, however, want to acknowledge that because this packet, it was included in your packet, but not included in the staff analysis, since it was not submitted as a revision to the application. I'd also like to note that there's no new information that should be introduced at this time for the discussion of this item outside of what's been presented to ensure proper analysis of the application material for this meeting. So the owners for the property submitted an application requesting to move forward with their project to demolish the detached garage structure. As outlined in section 8.05.130, the Historic Preservation Ordinance outlines any major alteration request for a Class 3 site must be evaluated by the board for its potential to be reclassified. This request remains the same from the previous meeting in February. Identified as a Class 3 site in our inventory for its association to notable architect John Porter Clark, this home in the Little Tuscany neighborhood was completed in 1940 as a custom-built home for the original owner, Mrs. Hill. The photograph on the slide shows the current site conditions of the stone-stacked walls of the residence, the varied roof forms, and the large boulders on site. The property owners were cited by the city in February for unpermitted work by the Code Compliance Department. In terms of the update, that compliance, the code compliance was related to the replacement of the existing roof and the replacement of all existing fenestration. This citation was directly associated with the loss of potential historic material, therefore relevant for this analysis. But since the citation, the owners have submitted permits pertaining to this work to start addressing these issues with the city. So they're in process with the Code Compliance Department. The HSPB is charged to review the site and identify if there is exceptional historical significance to pursue reclassification. Our ordinance states that one or more of the following 7 criteria must be met to qualify for initiating the designation proceedings. And the site should retain sufficient integrity to demonstrate its ability to meet one or more of the criteria listed in the previous slide. So if the board feels that the site has the potential to meet the criteria for historic designation, then they must decide to stay the request and initiate the designation proceedings. But if they feel that the project does not rise to that level of significance, of course, based on the information provided, the board may decide to take no action and allow the applicant to move forward with their proposed work and obtain the necessary approvals and permits. Based on the research presented and the observations of the current conditions of the site, and again, this is the information provided in the original application, staff made the staff findings and conclude that 877 Panorama was identified as a Class 3 with potential to meet one or more of the necessary criteria. but a historic resource report analyzing the full history and background of the resource would be necessary to determine if it warrants reclassification according to the preservation ordinance of Palm Springs. The new owners of the property are not seeking designation for this property and provided a conclusion as part of their application that they believe the property does not retain historic significance. Staff's recommendation to the board on the information obtained through this review process is to initiate that stay and to proceed with the designation proceedings, which would result in a historic resources report conducted by one of the city's on-call consultants, and reviewing that information based off of our historic designation criteria. If HSPB has any clarifying questions they wish to ask of staff or the applicant team, and again, clarifying questions may be taken at this time.
Board Member Hare?
I know that you prepared the staff report before the owner-initiated documents arrive. Does that mean that you need to present the conclusion that you arrived at earlier, as opposed to taking in that additional information to maybe readjust your recommendation?
So because the applicant wished to move forward with this application being presented to the board, they opted to present that as public comment. And so they were made aware that it would not include the additional information.
Thank you.
Hitchcock.
Two related questions. So is that what, so your statement early in the, was that there is no new information to be considered that we should consider, so we're not supposed to consider does that mean that we're not supposed to consider the research and the work done by Margarita Yerovac?
No, I understand what your question is. So the application contents is complete, but like any other project, if you have new public comment being submitted, then it's at the board's discretion to review that information and apply it to the discussion that you will have as a board. So it's not saying to negate any new public comments that have come into place. It's just addressing the fact that no new information should be brought up during the discussion outside of what's been presented here.
Okay.
So looking up new information or having new information being presented by outside of the forum here.
Gotcha. Okay. And then could you clarify if the city or the owners are pursuing corrective actions for the alterations that were unpermitted that were made? How are we supposed to could those corrections address some of the concerns that staff and other commenters have about the integrity of this site?
So integrity is really an item that concerns historic preservation, but not necessarily other departments. For example, the lack of a permit could be rectified by the submission of a permit, and whatever fees or what have you are incurred to ensure that proper inspections and whatnot are taken into consideration. So each department has their own objectives, if you will. Integrity is one that this board holds as an important feature, but not necessarily others.
So then it's my understanding that these, as you said, the code compliance issues that the city was addressing were specifically related to the alterations that they degraded the integrity of a potentially historic resource, and that would fall under the violations and enforcement section of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, which does allow for corrections such as removing and replacing what has been altered and a stay of permit issuance for up to 3 years. So could you clarify what the city's action, or is the city evaluate, or is the city pursuing compliance corrections in relation to the historic preservation ordinance? What considerations are they basing that off of?
So right now, we're kind of focusing on the application that's before us at hand, before we start to address the actual compliance issues. And so in terms of moving forward with those portions, that review process and the way it's outlined, there is a civil court procedure that would have to be enacted. So those are not being explored at this time, but we would look at it.
Even though that's what was violated.
That isn't what's before you in terms of our review right now.
But if it could affect the integrity evaluation of the property, or integrity's considerations of the property, that's our eligibility determination is directly related to the integrity. And so if the integrity of the property, the evaluation of the integrity of the property could change, then how are we supposed to make an eligibility determination if the final condition of the property has not been determined?
So again, I think what we're looking at here in terms of the enforcement process, that we need to confirm with, or we need to outline with the planning department in terms of how we decide to move forward with enforcement. What's before the board today isn't really discussing that enforcement action. It's determining if the existing property renders historic significance, and if that means additional research needs to be conducted, then in that conduction of the report, for instance, they would take into account the criteria and address the integrity issues along with all that has conspired on the site. So building permits, existing conditions, any sort of violations that have happened.
So it's standard procedure for us to evaluate integrity or evaluate eligibility of this property before the compliance has been resolved?
So the eligibility, if you have two choices, right? So you either have the choice to direct the designation proceedings, which would enact the analysis of the entire site, including the integrity. And in that analysis, it would expose any sort of existing building permits and any violations. And that analysis would combine all of that information together so that we have something to go off of in terms of process moving forward. And for your determination of the integrity. So that, we're relying on that report to provide that information.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board members? Questions for staff? Any other clarifications before we deliberate? Of staff questions?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, I think it's either a staff or discussion question, but I'm not positive. But could you explain if Clark is indicated as doing the reconstruction after the fire, could you clarify why we wouldn't necessarily treat that as part of the period of significance similarly to our first evaluation today?
We haven't provided any sort of indication of what the period of significance would be. Really, the two choices are you going to initiate a designation application process, which would do the legwork to determine what the significance is? And so if that research concludes that, yes, this is still part of the period of significance, that's what that would reveal. So it's not, we don't have enough information to make those conclusions right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, who would like to start? Board Member Hare.
I would like to thank the applicant for their excellent due diligence and commend them for going this route. I was very interested in the reports, how they were written and how well researched they were, providing comparable examples of this, and going to a very deeply into what is significant here. We are talking about the garage, and we now have established, or I think it has been established, that the garage itself is not original, but in a very altered state. And I frankly haven't changed my opinion from having read the original staff review, but I do feel very, very comfortable in reinforcing my opinion that we should take no action on this item.
Other board members?
I think you put it very well. You summarized exactly what I was thinking when I read through the additional information that we were sent. It kind of reinforced for me very similar that I still don't feel like the garage is the integral part of the integrity, I guess, of the property. And so I also am feeling that my position has not changed.
Board Member Maruzzi.
I have some knowledge of the work of Clark and Frey from 37 to the early 40s. And for the first 2 years of that period, they were working for Van Pelt and Lind. But they were Van Pelt and Lind of Pasadena was signing on their behalf because they didn't have architectural licenses. But I do know that several buildings were constructed that have the shed roof design during this period, but I've never seen anything, and I printed out the photographs. I'd never seen their work based using rocks as the main construction material, rock. It's very unusual from my experience. Yes, they're painted, but if you look at the historic photo here and the photo present day, it's not that different. Of course, the roof is different and the windows have been changed, but the openings seem to be similar. I think there's enough there, particularly of the construction material, to at least warrant some additional research that would be conducted as part of this second phase. So that's how I feel about it.
Mashka Hitchcock, you have any?
Yeah, I share Board Member Maruzzi's feelings about the, or analysis of the current condition of the property. And I would like to add that the potential loss of some historic integrity is exactly why we have Class 2 designation status. And this Class 2 specifically says it's something of significance. It's a property of significance that does not necessarily meet historic integrity or does not necessarily retain all the standards of integrity. And it's my opinion that this property is exactly why we have that that designation, and it's also exactly why we have protections for properties that have not been formally designated yet, that have been identified on the survey, so that we don't have a gradual degradation of integrity.
All right. Well, I have some comments if we're ready. Oh,
Could I
go
just
ahead.
add one
Sure.
more thing? In sort of responding to Peter, in reading the findings from both Margarita and the other gentleman, the summary that sort of becomes pertinent to me, if I may just read this one sentence, it says, "In conclusion, the subject property retains integrity of location, feeling, and association, but the property's design, setting, workmanship, and materials was substantially altered by fire damage in 1949, which I believe the only thing that left after the fire was some rock walls, and by later changes, and does not retain the integrity of its 1940 period of significance, or 1950, if you will." So that is, I think, significant.
I think it retains integrity of materials, and you can see the rock construction, and it looks,
Only the rock.
Yeah, but that's
Everything
the,
else is.
Right.
It's like the majority
well,
of
it's
the
the
house.
entirety of, I mean, the house is, it's walls and then the roof and the windows. And it looks to me that the rock was just painted. And I don't think the rock was destroyed in the fire.
No, I don't think so either.
And the window openings seem to be similar to what they are today.
And the permit records, or the records indicate that the reconstruction as well, like I said, was done by Clark.
Do you know that for sure?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it says on the complete list, the complete works of John Porter Clark.
Oh, right.
It has the reconstruction listed of this house listed on that complete works post after the fire.
I mean, I'm not coming to any conclusion about ultimately significance, but I think there's enough here to warrant at least the research. That's why we have this as an option.
Well, I want to offer some other thoughts on this. You know, this process is required in Title 8, Chapter 8 of 805 of the Municipal Code. And that process was basically violated by not getting building permits. And I agree with you. First of all, I also agree that there's sufficient materials there certainly to warrant a report that evaluates the resource considering recent alterations, but also according to the city's criteria specifically. I think there was some mention in the report, and thank you for providing additional information. There were eligibility standards that were referenced that were developed for a survey, not as part of the evaluation process for a city class 1 or 2 resource. And we need an analysis according to the city's ordinance, chapter 8.05 of Title 8, specifically relating to both class 1 and class 2 criteria. And integrity is a very different consideration for a class 2 resource. So I just feel like, you know, we're really, I would like to follow staff's recommendation to proceed with the additional resource and evaluation for a class 1 or 2 according to the requirements of the municipal code. I think it speaks to the credibility and integrity of the city's historic preservation program to not send a message that it's okay to do that any more than building and safety did that. You know, they went back and required building permits and inspections, and planning department probably went through a process as well. I also think it's for all the people who did go through the process correctly, you know, that it shows respect for the people who have already and will in the future follow the actual process and the municipal code. I also feel personally, for me, my integrity as someone who was assigned to this board to not enforce that really what the city does, to what's the word I'm trying to think of?
Advocate?
Yeah, to apply the ordinance and respect the principles of the city's historic preservation program. So for me, it's really a bigger issue than, you know, are there some alterations? I could argue, again, that I don't think painting a building is a big deal. We don't really know if John Porter Clark did you know, and we don't consider interiors if a lot of the fire damage was related to interior damage. In the garage, it could be a non-contributing feature to a resource. And we're not talking about the demolition of the garage today. We're talking about whether or not to proceed with the process as defined in the ordinance to either follow staff's recommendation to proceed with the process or allow the demolition. So I just wanted to clarify those on my side of things. I'm going to see if I had any other comments. I just don't feel like alterations that have already been made should exempt them from a process that's required by the municipal code. Yes, board member here.
Could you clarify what you mean by, what code violations are you referencing?
The windows were all changed by the current property owners without permits, as was the roof.
Former property owners.
Former, this was former.
It was
So
former property owners? That's not my understanding.
could we clarify that?
Staff can clarify that.
California law, the legal responsibility for unpermitted work transfers with the property.
But can staff clarify?
Let's
You know, let's
just,
let staff
Yeah.
clarify this.
I think we might be more well-served to ask the property owners directly, since it is their property, and they would be on the record as to the provenance of that
Okay,
work.
that would be a good idea. Could they come up to the table, please?
We'll let our representative.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Can we have a moment?
Sure.
Seems like a yes or no question.
Is that okay? Are we?
Yeah, we can,
Okay.
you're well within your discretion to watch the meeting and let them confer.
Can we continue to chat, or should we?
I think we should probably just hold off so
Okay.
that, so they can be privy to any conversation.
Yes,
that happens.
I agree. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's loud.
Well, I have
Ring as well.
a
go ahead,
family
take your
issue.
call.
Oh.
And mommy is sick, so it's been an emergency. Sorry. Apologize for that.
It's gonna happen. It happened at the right time.
Yeah.
A technical question. When I was watching the video of the last proceeding, everything was from this camera up here. And we all looked they all looked small, and you couldn't even know who was speaking at the time. Why does it cut to the individual speakers?
So I can tell you that when they redid this room, the AV system, our IT folks are still working out some of the kinks in the AV system, and central among them is the camera.
Good,
so-
because it looked rather ridiculous.
It looked
These
a
little people in their heads, but you know, who was speaking or anything, couldn't even tell. But that's not what we're here for.
No. Ms. Bonstone, would you like to come up, please? Should she restate her name for the record?
Sharon Bonsell from Greenberg Lesker, representing the owner. Sorry, I hadn't discussed this with my client before, it hadn't come up, because we're focused on the historic preservation of the property. So all of the windows and the roof had been previously replaced in the 60s and 70s, and that's in your report. So there was no original windows that were there that were removed and then recently replaced. It was, these were all, as evidence in the report that we submitted, these had been altered significantly. Both the roof and the windows and the roof of both the garage and the house had been replaced in the 60s and 70s. And those permits are provided, and they're specifically.
They were replaced again by the current owners.
Yeah, so recently, it was noted that the roof and the windows had been replaced and permits hadn't been obtained, so they immediately went and filed for the permits. So the permitting issue is done. I mean, that's been resolved. And from the historic preservation perspective, we know that the windows and the roof themselves had been altered significantly beforehand, and so they wouldn't have contributed to your value. There was no integrity of those particular items. I mean, as you said, the only question of integrity is that there's a stone wall, and that the stone wall seemed to have survived the fire, and that it was retained in the rebuilding by Clark. And, that's the material that has been retained. Everything else in the entire building has been replaced over
Was the
time.
previous, let's say the 1950 new roof, was that like for like?
No.
You sure?
Yeah, it was, if you look at the building permits, let's see, and the pictures, it is an identical.
From the original construction?
Yeah, and specifically, the garage's roof is significantly altered, and that was described in the report. Because with the addition, there was an addition, and so the garage roof was extended, and the eaves are actually all replaced. The eaves aren't the original eaves that were there in the
That's
garage.
assuming that the period of significance ends at 1940 and wouldn't extend to the reconstruction post-fire that was done by Clark.
Which is a possibility.
No, I mean, so we're acknowledging that Clark did the rebuild. And then even after that, there were further additions that were not done by Clark, that were done in the 60s and 70s that we have the permits for.
But I think that, since Clark did the work in 50, the work that was done could have significance in its own right.
Sound right.
It doesn't have to be identical to
Right.
what was there before.
Right, but even after 1950, if you look at the letter that I provided and summarized everything, and if you look at the report, there was, like an enclosed patio in 57, there was exterior remodeling in 64, there
No,
was
but I
sewage
think the
putting
issue
in,
isn't so
all
much-
of these things that were changing after the 1949 or 50 second rebuilding by Clark.
But none of
But
that
the-
notes the
right.
windows or the roof
Those are the
specifically.
issues. Not additions to the rear and all that kind of, anyway, I guess that's for discussion amongst ourselves.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Does anybody have any other questions?
We
Thank
can't, we can't look up any other
No.
information.
No.
But
think we have-
I have seen photos of this before, these recent photos of this, before alterations, and I am highly skeptical that the windows and roof were replaced with not like for like after Clark's reconstruction.
And even if that isn't true, it still
Kind of
seems
suspect.
to me that it could have significance in its own right, even if it was.
Agreed.
So, there's enough here that are questions that could be resolved with
With a report.
an independent report that isn't, commissioned by the property owners, by staff, hiring architectural historians that would do this. That's what you do, right? You put out a call for
With our on-calls, yes.
on-call, yeah, right. So,
So are we ready for a motion?
I think you should make the motion. You got a very good list of why it's significant to
Okay.
choose one or
Find
another.
that. Sorry, find my motion in the report. All right, I recommend that the HSPV stay the request for alteration for a period of up to 120 days and authorize the processing of an application to consider whether the building qualifies for designation and direct the applicant to commission the historic resources report necessary for processing this application. Do we have a second?
A second.
Okay. So, sorry. All right, so we have a motion by Chair Hansen and a second by Board Member Mashka Hitchcock. Is there any further discussion? Yes.
Just a question, so this means now the applicant will have to pay the cost of that staff report, correct?
You'd have to ask staff that.
The way that the recommendation is written is that the applicant would be commissioning the report, yes.
Say it again?
That the applicant would commission the report.
But the
through
selection of the,
Using our on-call consultants.
you don't interview them yourself?
No, they changed
No,
the
no, no.
code.
We review the application, but we would use our on-call consultants, but in this instance, we're recommending that the applicant be responsible for commissioning the report.
Why?
It's
Why would you recommend that if that's different from what you normally recommend? I'm just confused. Or is this the way it is?
It got changed.
So
There
from
was a
now on,
code
this is,
change.
the idea is that the applicant
Yeah,
commissions it. So before.
I think
I'm
you're maybe
confused.
confusing the designation with the report for this process that would, if we vote for it.
am I?
They're two, I'm not sure. I thought you, because nothing's changed. They didn't change that.
Yeah, the review process hasn't changed. The recommendation is to initiate the designation proceedings, which would start with the initiation of the report. And the report is conducted by the on-call consultant, so we would have a bid that goes out to our city's on-call historians, and then they would bid on the report. And then, once that report is completed, it comes back to the board for review, for recommendation, and if it moves forward to city council. So that process hasn't changed. The fee structure has changed in that, I think that's maybe what Member Hare is referring to. The designation proceedings now have a fee associated with that process. That fee process is being, is not subsidized. So that fee process is a responsibility of the applicant to initiate the designation proceedings. In this instance, staff's recommendation is saying that the entire process is being, the entire process, including the commissioning of the report, is at the applicant's expense and responsibility.
But who,
So that would, my question was, who's paying for it? It is the applicant. Okay.
who actually selects amongst, let's say there are 3 firms on the list?
So we select the consultant that can make the timing for the 120 days.
Okay.
And usually it's by price, so we would take the
Lowest
bidder.
responsible bidder.
All right, responsible. All right, very good, thank you.
Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that answers my
Okay.
question.
All right, so we have, as I mentioned, a motion and a second, so I will call for the vote. All in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Okay, we have motions 3-2. The motion passes 3-2. All right, thank you all for coming tonight. Okay, we are moving on to report requests and comments. Are there any brief general comments or other issues of concern for members of the board? From members of the board? Oh, let's wait a second for Sarah.
Isn't there another agenda item of the house that we looked at?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm so
there's-
sorry.
there is.
Is the person here? I'm so sorry. Getting way ahead of
Skipped
myself.
B.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh, you're welcome. I was like,
Thank you.
Why did we look at that house
Okay.
yesterday for no reason?
The
Let's
request
just
by
wait.
Jill Lewis.
Yes. I'm gonna
Yes.
just wait a second for Sarah to be here.
The reason I was asking about who selects it, it would be appropriate for the applicant to select the firm, even though they're paying for it. I mean, it's
It's the
always,
same thing that they would do for CEQA, I think.
right, but the city would select the consultant,
I
and
think
it's
so.
paid for by the property owner.
That's my understanding.
That's always, at least every other situation I've ever seen has been that way.
Okay, we're gonna move on to new business. Item 4B.
That's a problem. Something that we can solve.
But it was indicated in the certain.
Okay, you guys, we're done with that. Okay, we're moving on to item
yes.
4B. Request for demolition of a Class 4 site at 1481 San Jacinto Way, case number H-Demo 2026-0002. Do we have a staff report?
We do. This is our last item of the evening. This is an owner request for demolition of a Class 4 site at 1481 San Jacinto Drive. Jacinto Drive.
Oh, I didn't click on the thing.
So this is a single-family home located in Movie Colony East. It is an internal lot that is approximately 8,200 square feet in size. The simple and nondescript building was constructed in 1953, and the new owners wish to demolish all structures on the site and construct a new single-family home on the lot. Here's a photograph of the home from the street, which shows the block wall surrounding the property and the mature trees located in the front yard. And these are photographs that show the alterations made to the carport/garage, which was enclosed at some point for livable space, the front yard and rear elevation. Based on the physical evidence observed on site, exterior alterations have been made to the home, and also the casita structure, which appears to have been detached at one point in time, but the original steel windows do appear to be intact. Pursuant to section 8.05.130, the request for complete demo of a class 4 site requires the HSPB to review the property for any historic significance by seeing if it meets any of the listed criteria for exceptional significance. And the designation process also requires the evaluation of integrity based on the listed areas on this, based on the listed topics on this slide. The choices that HSPB has regarding this review is to either identify the site's potential to be reclassified as a historically significant property and initiate a stay to pursue this historic preservation designation proceedings, or to determine that this class 4 site does not possess exceptional significance as presented, nor retains the necessary integrity to demonstrate historic merit. Based on the presented evidence in the application, as well as the observations on site, staff finds that this single-family home does not meet the criteria for historic significance or retain the necessary integrity to warrant its reclassification. The current owners are not seeking designation of the site, and staff is recommending HSPB take no action and allow the applicant to proceed with next steps. Take any questions related to the staff report. And I believe the applicant representative is joining us online.
Okay, Mr. Marusi.
I understand your listing of the alterations. They all seem to have occurred at the rear of the house or other places that are not visible from the street. So do we tend to determine that it's not, in my experience, the alterations really would be the ones that are visible from the street that have some significance for integrity. So I think we're spending a lot, there's a lot of information about what occurred in the rear, but from the street, it looks like it's fairly original.
Outside of the carport that's been enclosed?
Yeah.
In front. Yeah, I think that was just to list kind of what conditions and changes we've observed on this site, but not necessarily an integrity analysis.
You said that you don't think it meets integrity standards.
Right, so staff doesn't find that it meets a criteria for historic designation, and then on top of that, in terms of the integrity findings, there are certain aspects of integrity that continue to meet, for instance, setting and different aspects of the integrity, but it needs to meet one of the criteria for historic set.
Oh, I understand. I was just focusing on integrity. But there are other issues we have to deal with too.
Yeah, class 4, let's remember, is only on a list by virtue of its age, not by, versus a class 3, which has actually been identified in a survey as eligible. Any other questions for staff? Okay. The action is now with the board. Anyone want to begin a discussion? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. Does the property owner? They didn't provide any public comment during.
They have not raised their hand to indicate
Okay.
that they wish to.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, nope, just kidding. Then they did.
Yeah, technically, they didn't speak.
All right.
So this is not a public hearing?
Jill Lewis, you are now online with us. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to make any comments on this.
I don't necessarily need to make additional comments. I did submit a letter regarding our thoughts on the property. And I am an architect, so it was sort of from that perspective. And then I also submitted a letter from a contractor I work with frequently, also here in Palm Springs. But I just want to note that I'm here if anyone has questions for us about, or me, I should say, about our plans for the property, or, we are trying to find a home for the steel windows. I've put out inquiries to a few different organizations that accept building materials. No takers yet, but I'm working on that. So I'll stop talking at this point, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I know one board member who will be happy about the potential reuse. All right, if we don't have any relevant questions related to our deliberation, do we have a motion?
Oh. Did we want to, anyone
Is
else
there
want to
any
say
dis-
anything?
No, is there, yeah, go ahead,
Oh, I'm
discussion.
sorry, I didn't know we were
I
jumping.
thought,
Oh.
I thought we were.
You know, I feel strongly about vernacular architecture. I don't think this is a very good example of it, of anything that I'm familiar with, as relates to significance. But I did, not resent, I didn't agree with the comments about integrity. That's not why I'm coming to my conclusion. It's for other reasons. I just don't think it's a significant vernacular example. That's why, not because the changes, because the changes are, to me, all the rear.
Well, it has to be significant and retain integrity, so if there's no significance.
Right. No, the significance is the key here,
Yeah.
not the integrity
Okay.
aspect. I just wanted to make that clear because
Okay.
you shouldn't use the integrity always as a way of saying, well, that's not significant because the integrity is bad. Well, yeah, but we have to look at the other things.
Good point. Any other discussion? All right, do we have a motion?
Do you have a discussion point?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to make
Oh, I'm sorry. I
a
thought
short,
you
sorry,
were- I
a
thought you
comment.
were shaking your head no.
Yeah, I agree with Board Member Ruzzi, and I also I also really appreciated Ms. Lewis's letter outlining their findings about the property and the clearly very considered way that they arrived at this decision for demolition, because it is unfortunate to lose a vernacular house, and we don't take it lightly, I'm sure, and I appreciated that the applicant did not take that lightly either. That's it.
Anyone else? All right, do we have a motion?
I'll move that we follow staff's recommendation to take no action and allow the processing of the major alteration and determine pursuant to CEQA that this action is not a project.
And a second.
Second.
We have a motion by Board Member Payanesa and a second. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, can we restate that recommendation, or that motion again? It looks like there was a typo. It's for processing a demolition, not a major
Oh,
alteration.
I was wondering about that. but-
So you want to completely restate it?
If you
Okay,
could,
can you go ahead and reread?
Sure, so I make a motion that we take no action, or follow staff's recommendation to take no action, allow the processing of the demolition, and determine pursuant to CEQA that this action is not a project.
Okay.
I second.
Thank you. We have a revised motion by Board Member Payanesa and a second by Board Member Mashka Hitchcock. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Okay, now we will be moving on to reports, requests, and comments. Are there any brief general comments and or other issues of concern from members of the board?
I have one question for Sarah. So, kind of relative to the previous, the Panorama property, if, it's going to go one of two ways, that I guess we all understand that. If at a later date, based on the report, the board decides to allow them to demolish the garage, does that mean if in the future they want to do something to the house, they still have to go through the same process?
And I'm gonna pull it out of Panorama and talk about it from a general review standpoint. So if an application comes back before the board with a report stating a recommendation for designation, then obviously it moves through a designation process, and now it's under a Class 1 or Class 2 status, meaning future alterations or changes require a certificate of appropriateness. If it does not meet that criteria, then typically that particular resource is now no longer going to be evaluated as a historic resource, and usually gets downgraded to a class 4. It gets removed from the class 3 list because we're saying moving forward, it has no historical significance to evaluate that property. So we wouldn't run into this cyclical coming back every time and doing the entire process again. So that would be the procedure for projects that would come back and it's determined that it has no historic significance.
So even as a class 4, it would not trigger a review.
So the class 4, and the way it was envisioned is that it's really a screening process. Because of the way our inventory was completed, there are certain areas that didn't get full visual from the street because these were done by the right-of-way. So if you had a tall hedge or you were in a community that didn't afford access to our surveyors, we weren't able to go in there. And so these class 4s, when they come in as a demo request or a major alteration, affords us that glimpse of what we're actually looking at. And then it can be elevated to a review process saying, hey, this was found, and there's significance, shall we explore this further? But oftentimes it really is just a screening process for saying it's old, but it's not, doesn't have historic merit. So they are different in terms of how it's screened, and that's outlined in the ordinance. Major class 4 sites are technically reviewed at a permit level unless it's elevated to, let's say it needs to be designated. So we're screening those through the building permit process.
So, sorry, can I follow up on that? So if it's downgraded to a class 4 or if a property is downgraded to a class 4 after the board has made a determination not to pursue designation, it's still a class 4, so it would come through the historic preservation officer, or the historic preservation would have to be evaluated or like looked at on a staff level before like going to permit review. Is that, or standard permit review? Is that?
So the way that our permits are triggered is that when they submit for a permit, there's an alert hold that gets activated saying, hey, this is a 3 or a 4 property. And so it initiates a certain level of staff review just to double check the property. If we have a site that has a determined decision made by the board, then it's not going to initiate that same level of screening because it's already been reviewed.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So we can't do anything that would, in a property where there was one part that may be demolished and one part not, we can't hold the one part hostage.
No, because you wouldn't review anything.
No,
You wouldn't
would
review
not,
anything
yeah.
of that property if you've let it go. If you say no action and you let it go, you're not going to come back and say, well, actually, we still want to look at the house. That's why your evaluation is not just of one piece of the property, it's the entire parcel. And within that parcel, you in your review process may determine this is significant, this is non-contributing, but the designation is with the parcel, so you're able to make those distinguishing pieces. You have to look at it as a whole. Yeah.
The only thing I was going to mention, and maybe you were going to, is that the California Preservation Foundation Conference has opened up for registration, and it's in Riverside this year at the Convention Center. So if anyone is interested, technically, we're all supposed to be doing training annually as board members and according to the city's certified local government status. And certainly that would qualify. You can register even just for one day. I don't think you can for just a session, or the whole conference.
They're very interesting conferences.
And if you're a member, it's less. And I had asked at one point if since we're required to do training, if the city would pay for any training, but there's nothing in
There
place.
is a budget for it. We were asked that earlier in the year.
Yeah, I asked that earlier, so I don't know. I don't know if you need to
We'll
check
be happy to
into
look
that.
into it and
Okay.
maybe report back next month.
Okay.
I mean, it's rare that it's within driving distance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it, so that's one thing. But yeah, I've gone to quite a few of them, and actually, it's really fun because you meet people in the same positions as us at certain events, and you talk about how things are similar, different, in different cities, and it's just fun. It's
And
really,
they
you learn a
usually
lot.
have, you know, a local committee that focuses on some local type issues, and
They even have tours.
they have some associated tours and
Yeah,
things
it's
like
really
that.
And what
great.
is the date?
I think, Sarah?
Yeah, it looks like it's
So-
May 6th through the 10th
Okay.
is what I have. And I'll go ahead and forward the information that
To
I have
everybody.
to our board members, and then we'll follow up with any.
That's it. Given when the conference is, we'll follow up with more information with you all via email. I think it's not, waiting a month and then
Yeah.
having it be a month from that
Mhm.
date doesn't seem
I mean,
reasonable.
you can register the day of if you want to, but
But
just
Just
thought
for your
I'd
own
put it out there
planning.
for your consideration.
Wish I could go.
We wish you could too. They always have a young professionals
I know, it's during finals
get
week.
together.
Those finals.
Well, you'd think the preservation program at
Yeah.
USC would have figured that out. All right. Yes, they'll forgive you. And does staff have any comments?
I think, I sent an email out a few days ago related to recruitment being open, so go ahead and take a look at that in terms of those who are, their commission is expiring, if you're interested in reapplying. It is a reapplication process, so it's open for the entire month, so please go ahead and visit that website. If you have questions, you can direct them to me.
Isn't it March through the end of April?
I think it's for the month. Maybe I know it opened on the 1st.
Right.
That's what I thought I saw, it was through the end of April.
It may be through the end of April, you're right.
Just because, some people want to take some time to think about it. No, not us, but I mean, in terms of other people that I would suggest for the positions.
I think you're correct. So yeah, if you can, the website is open, so go ahead and take a look. If you have questions, let me know.
Nothing else? All right. Historic Site Preservation Board will adjourn to its regularly scheduled meeting on Tuesday, April 7th, 2026 at 5:30 PM. We will meet in the large conference room at City Hall, 3200 Topwoods Canyon Way. Thank you. And